Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Cognitively CRE. I'm James. I'll be your co-host today and introducing Mike, my co-host.
Hey.
A little bit about yourself, Mike.
Hey, yeah. For those who know me, I'm a passionate believer in innovation and transformation. Spent most of my time in the electronic products, from components all the way through sub-assemblies and ultimately full systems. And within the last 10 years plus, I've been doing, that type of work with corporate real estate, and shared a very similar vision with James around human-centric cognitive spaces. So that's me.
Awesome. I'm very pleased to introduce our very special guest, Vic. Vic, would you mind telling us, the audience, a little bit about yourself, sir?
Hi, everybody. I am Vic Bangia, CEO of Verm Consulting. We're a corporate real estate strategy and operations consulting practice based in Minnesota, but we work all over the world helping corporate clients in their outsourcing initiatives to service providers. That's the majority of our work. We also do strategy and operations consulting, which involves workplace design, organizational design, leadership training, and also I do a lot of public speaking. So that's why I'm here today. And I'm very happy to be here. Thanks.
That is excellent, sir. Hey, let's hop right in. Everybody knows, right? There's this massive state of disruption and change in the industry as it relates to workplace, but probably even more so from a facility management perspective. And I really wanted to dive a little deeper into that. And Vic, you have some really good insights into this, and so I'm going to ask you to help us unpack this in a sec. But what does it really mean from a facility management perspective now that we're hopefully exiting the COVID pandemic? What's really changed and what's really disruptive in their world?
Well, so I hope we're exiting the COVID pandemic soon. It's still a very large unknown. A lot of companies are putting together return to work strategies and plans. However, some of the things that I've found that are still large gaps in those return to work plans is that they don't address physical safety as well as psychological safety. And that is creating a lot of apprehension and anxiety amongst employees about coming back to the workplace. I think that it's really important to talk about the technology that can provide a level of comfort and a level of safety and security for employees. And that includes everything from access to the buildings, as well as safety, physical safety. But the most important aspect of that, I think, is psychological safety, which is giving people the opportunity to voice concerns and having an explicit plan to have those concerns addressed, whether it might be social distancing or whether it might be policies that are in place post-COVID for wellness and hygiene and all sorts of other things like that.
So Vic, just to kind of follow up, so you're thinking that we're seeing corporate real estate, many of them thinking about, hey, 2021 is about planning and assessing kind of where we're at. Does that suggest that they're not really going to make a move in 2021 at all?
Well, when we talk about moves and physical moves, yeah, I don't think there's going to be that much physical movement in 2021. Probably a lot of planning that goes all the way to the end of the year, at least till the end of the third quarter, as far as what the future scenario for the portfolio will look like. But I think in 2022, you'll start to see some actual physical changes. And I've actually written an article out on LinkedIn called Start Thinking About 2022 Today. Right. Which talks about what I see as a lot of the shifts that are going to be taking place. Really, companies rethinking their downtown CBD office space and maybe looking at suburban locations or even locations in other geographies where they can kind of go more horizontal to allow people the space that they need and the flexibility they need to work from multiple locations.
Sure. Great.
That's awesome. There's a topic, or really, I guess, a question in the back of my mind, having recently been able to take part in facility management, workplace evolutionaries series of events, and being able to have a number of conversations with some really smart facility managers. I wonder, sort of globally even, if facility management is now thinking, or in a position of thinking about workplace technology and what that means. And workplace technology requires a definition in and of itself. The enterprise technology, the typical IT stuff, I think is pretty well owned. The facility management technology, even in things like smart buildings, are typically energy related or indoor air quality related. There's a piece in the middle that's the workplace technology piece. It's the piece that measures team engagement or utilization of space, or maybe it's desk booking. Is that part of what needs to be considered from a facility management procurement package? Is that something that maybe needs to be brought into the conversation now? I mean, what are you seeing?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I think procurement of real estate services is going to change quite a bit. For years, I've been fighting that commoditization, if you will, of procurement of corporate real estate facilities management services. This is not widgets that you're buying professional services, which requires a totally different mindset. In fact, when I built Virum, I built the consulting practice to be the eHarmony of outsourcing, because I wanted to focus on the relationship first. I meet with the service providers even before we start to write the RFP. We reverse engineer the RFP so that it's better aligned with the client's desired scope of work. But bringing the service providers in early even allows us to put together a scope of work for the marketplace that's clear, achievable, and realistic. But now, after COVID, things need to change even more. I think companies ought to be thinking about bifurcating some of the services that were traditionally a big bundle of packaged services from service providers, and looking for the best of the best in each of those discrete services. Everything from change management to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging consulting, leadership skills training, because leaders need a whole different mindset to manage a remote workforce, and the technology for workplace safety, which we talked a little bit about already. I think all of that has to be kind of segregated to see, are we getting the best of the best in each of those areas? And all of that dovetails into a sort of an emerging topic, which is sustainable procurement, which is also part of another emerging topic, which is environmental, social governance, and responsibility. Because those goals, the G in those goals, are how you work as a corporate client with all of your vendors and partners. So all of that's happening while we're also elevating the entire corporate real estate and facilities management discussion to include HR and IT, because what real estate is going to become is really an enabler for recruiting and retention and productivity and wellness and all these other things that prior to this weren't really part of real estate's domain. It was really about space. Now it's about productivity and managing that remote enabled workforce.
It's a really great segue, Vic, in thinking about how we used to measure workplace or office, and it was really around utilization of space, and maybe it was utilization of space because the overarching strategy was to drive cost out of corporate real estate in some form or fashion, right? So that kind of made sense. Moving forward, however, in a post-pandemic world, it's our position, Cognitive's position, that we're not measuring utilization for the sake of measuring utilization. We need to be measuring something different. So what is that something that we're measuring? And what I firmly believe is what we're measuring is effective team dynamics now from a built environment perspective, and how that can be a tool to help our employees be more engaged, and as a tool to help improve employee diversity and engagement and things of that nature. I will say there was a little bit of a technical glitch that we overcame. So Chris Bodler, sir, how are you? I'd like to introduce Chris, and then Chris, I have a question for you, sir. So just a quick introduction of yourself.
About myself, I'm 10 years in people analytics and workplace analytics. I have a background in multiple Fortune 500s, but also helping some smaller unicorns grow from 5 people up to 5,000. So it's been across the board, a bunch of different industries. And I apologize for being a little late to the party, but I clicked on the wrong link.
Better late than never.
Yes. And I will readily say that was my fault. So don't nobody, that's all on me. That's not Chris's fault. So Chris, that being said, buddy, thinking about what we measured in the past and what we should be measuring. I mean, everybody seems to has opinions out there. And I think a lot of people are maybe using the right terms, but maybe in the wrong way, right? At least they're differently than how we would use the terms. And those terms are organizational network analysis and workplace analytics. And I think that's because just contextually what we talk about, what we need from those has changed in a post-pandemic world. So can you give us a little bit of insight into those terms and what they mean now?
Sure. So first off, everybody's great at measuring surveys. Right from the very beginning, like we've been surveying our people to death, but it's not necessarily the most ideal way to get information from our employees. I have seen response rates everywhere from 5% all the way up to 95%. And when we're talking about trust and understanding how the future of the workplace is going to be utilized, like there's possibly some reservations on how employees want to respond. They don't always want to give their truthful answer. So things like workplace analytics and organizational network analytics are perfect tools to get passive sources of data and allow our employees to speak in terms of their behavior and not necessarily in their direct perceptions. So we can see how employees are moving about the office through different workplace tools. You can badge data, sensor data, Wi-Fi data, anything that has a beacon on it, like we can pick up for every employee. We can track them as much or little as we need to. But the key difference between workplace analytics and organizational network analytics is the terms of collaboration. When we're talking about ONA or organizational network analytics, we're talking about how people are collaborating. And this is how people are emailing each other, how they're working on Slack or Teams together. And this is, how they're attending different Zoom meetings. And this is, we're measuring these different, these tools, not for maybe a big brother approach, but more so from the perspective of, where are the silos in the organization? Where are teams not necessarily collaborating as much as they should be? Or where are teams kind of in the unknown? Like we maybe have a marketing team that isn't talking to the customer team as much. And that can have serious repercussions when we're talking about, taking a market or a product to market. So all of these different tools that we have at our disposal, like everything from surveys to workplace analytics to organizational network analytics, like these are just multitude of different data sources that we can utilize to make sure that we're making the best decisions at the end of the day.
I love that quote from EO that basically says, the new world is synthesizing data to make smart decisions. And I honestly think that's the state that corporate real estate, facility management, workplace optimization is in today. It's really being able to generate smart insights from data sets that they have that supports optimization of a strategy. And I think that's really key, that the strategy isn't that we need an office, how do we make it more efficient and wring dollars out of it so it doesn't cost us so much. It's the fact that the office is an incredibly valuable tool. The physical built environment is an incredible valuable tool for something. And our position is it's for effective team dynamics. It's to help the teams communicate. It's to help in teams with employee engagement.
Yeah.
And,
I'll add to this, Jane. I saw this, and I've said this so many times before, is we've had these surveys, and Chris is absolutely right. There's a data point, right? And that is going to continue, right? I don't see it going away. But when you start thinking about if you're going to really focus on employees, on retaining those employees, trying to find the best talent and that type of thing, you just have to measure things differently, right? You got to have added tools to get that done. And I think that's where we're starting to see now corporate real estate as well as companies trying to better understand how do we get that done.
Yeah, and I would just say too that the data can serve two different purposes as well. It can increase the amount of psychological safety that exists in the office because it gives people the ability to look at reports and feel good about the company's approach to keeping them safe. What it also does is it reduces or diffuses confirmation bias, which is typically what people have when they look at data and interpret it based on their own filters. If you start to provide real, true, accurate data about safety, there's really no refuting the data. It is the data, and it is proving that the surfaces are clean, that the access is being controlled. All of that kind of stops the rumor mill, and it stops the insecurity that people feel about coming back to the office. So I think that the data, properly analyzed and properly collected can go far in helping people feel comfortable about returning to the office.
You made a perfect point at the very beginning. Like, this isn't a procurement issue. This is not an HR issue. This is not IT. Like, it's all the above. There is no silos anymore that we can rely on to get the best results for our people. We need to bring everybody together and make sure we're not only looking at, so say for example, like we pulled bad data from facilities management. You know that 500 people are coming in. Well, who are those 500 people? Until you pair that up with HR data, you really don't know. So it could be all the customer service people, and that's nobody else in the organization's coming in, or it could just be half marketing, half engineering, and it's to know these finer levels of detail is just it's eye opening, and that's only possible when you truly bring everybody to the table and get them to start talking and sharing information.
Yeah, and just one other point, Chris, you just brought to mind was, and it's really for the leadership, the management, these are the people that they manage, and to be able to have thoughtful, informed discussions with employees about how they're participating in teams. Are the meetings effective? Are they maybe kind of losing their interest, right? I mean, those are all very, very important for managers. And I'm telling you, if I was still in a major corporation, I'd be looking at HR going, help me.
It brings up an interesting segue, right? So how do you remove the silos, and what are the tools that we're using to look at this as a cross-functional initiative at a corporate level? And I think now it's time to get real, right? It's time to cut through the BS, as I like to say, and to get deep into what can be done and how can we do it, regardless of whether or not you're working in the built environment or meaning the central office or in your home office or maybe even in a coffee shop somewhere. Do we have the ability or the data sets or the tools, software systems and processes to be able to measure our team effectiveness, our employee effectiveness across the spectrum of our shared strategic initiatives with no silos in place? And I think the answer is yes. We have something called a reference architecture. So let me give you a little bit on the reference architecture. There are many, many systems, if not thousands of systems, software platforms, when you look at the silo sets. And everyone who hears my voice, their corporations have many of these deployed already. They may not be talking to each other, may not be sharing data. They may be siloed in the insights that they can provide. But invariably what we see when we start having conversations about what can be done and how we measure things is that there's new types of workplace technology systems that need to be considered to be deployed to be very effective. And how do we have a conversation about those where we can get real specific about the budgeting of it, the ability to integrate it with other types of systems, and the efficacy that it's going to have at measuring a particular strategic initiative? To answer those questions, we've come up with something called the reference architecture. It's a series of, or a grouping of systems, vendors, that fit together in a manner that works well, right? And we call that the cognitive workplace. It's a way for us to be able to have a conversation about these types of tools and software platforms and how they integrate into, again, being able to provide the insights necessary to optimize workplace. As an example of what that looks like, I was going to bring in one of our partners called Meeting Quality. Kelvin McGrath, the CEO and founder of Meeting Quality, is in Australia, Melbourne, I believe. So his time zone's a little outside of us. So what I was able to do through the magic of a pre-recorded event is put together an interview with Kelvin. So what you'll see in this next clip is an interview with Kelvin McGrath as we discuss Meeting Quality, and Jane Mathers, who is the CEO and founder of Critical Core. So the three of us had a great conversation about meeting quality and how it fits into the conversation, in fact, that we just had. So let's take a look at that.
The best place to be able to actually figure out what's going on in terms of an organization is a meeting. And so it originally started by creating a really fast interface to be able to work out what people are actually, how people are actually working together and what they're thinking about each other. From there, we then used it to predict a whole pile of other things. So we say if you're at a meeting, you're probably trying to do something more than just what the meeting is. For instance, if you're at a project meeting, you're probably part of a project, and we can work out all of the meetings in a project, and we can then say, okay, there's a whole pile of stuff going on in the background beside normal time, cost, and quality metrics of a project. Let's use things like the emotion that's coming out of the meeting. Let's look at the quality of the relationships between all of the individual players, and let's feed that into our AI, and we'll then use that as another predictor beside the normal metrics of predicting what a project's doing. So it turned out that we had this amazing treasure trove of information, because obviously with AI now, you can actually feed in all sorts of things, and we collect unusual things for an organization, so that we can predict things like, as James has said earlier, we can predict what's happening with employee engagement, and we can do that in just about real time.
We're in the process of figuring out whether or not they should continue to work remotely, go hybrid, or go back to the office. So I think that some of those project managers would want to know if there's a change in how their clients do their work. They would want to be able to know, is this because they just changed where they worked or how they worked? As a project manager, I'm managing this project, and all of a sudden, the client says, okay, we're going to go hybrid now. We've been remote all this time. We're going to go hybrid now. You'd want, as a data point, to know this is the point where we went hybrid, so it didn't mess up the rest of your data. You'd be able to say, no, the capability, the capabilities, the progress of this project just changed because we went hybrid, or we all went back to the office, as opposed to the manager just had a fight with his wife and is coming into the office and is just not paying as much attention. All of a sudden your bad manager got even into a worse situation. Sort of like when there's a change in the way the meeting's going, you want to know, is it because it's all of a sudden gone hybrid, as opposed to because something else happened that would cause the meeting to go back, meeting success to change. Or it might be you go hybrid and the meeting quality improves all of a sudden. You'd like to know, oh my God, I guess that's the better one. If all of a sudden the meeting quality improves all of a sudden, you'd like to know, wow, that's because we just went hybrid.
So we already know that. One of the things that we do with our remote is that we're actually got people in terms of their balance from work and home. Mm-hmm. So we can tell that already.
Okay.
And we can tell what's meeting by meeting what's happening with the relationships and so on. And it's dramatic when. And it's really obvious from some of the data that I've seen when meetings go from being when they went from being, and here in Australia, Melbourne went into lockdown last year, and we could tell the parts of the organisation that went into lockdown. And it was dramatic.
Better or worse?
Worse. Actually, it was interesting. There was it started off like people really liked it, but then it deteriorated, and it ended up being polarized. There are people who really like it, and there are people who really hate it.
People who really like it and people who really hate it. It's interesting. We could probably dive into a 1-hour conversation on why that is, but when you think about the digital generation. And sort of, think about where they are in their lives and their growth patterns. And they, maybe they have a smaller apartment downtown and they're living the young guy's life or the young gal's life to the best. But when that's the only place they have to live, work, and play, that can be tiring after a period of time.
And many times they're doing it with 3 or 4 roommates that are all doing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, I can see that, right? And it's not just to make an excuse or just using a single example, but I think there are many things that that we could do well when we first started, that over time we start losing a sense of things. And those sense of things are team dynamics, team cohesion, employee engagement. And what makes all that real interesting, these are all mostly HR functions, right? And managers working with HR to help identify and improve these things. So then how does workplace, why are we talking about this, from a workplace perspective? Workplace in terms of the physical office is a tool to help improve that. That's what our research shows, and that's what we've built all of our service offerings around. So how do you take the enterprise systems, the workplace technology systems, the facility management systems? You don't lose the notion that we have to have, maintain a circular economy. We have to reduce our carbon footprint. We have to be very secure in our facility. Get all that, right? When we're doing that. That's what smart building's been doing since the 70s. There's ways to improve, and we're doing that. But now we have to measure it in a different way. And that's what I love about what Kelvin brings to the table at Meeting Quality, is he's able to measure in a very lightweight way a glimpse of what's happening at a team dynamic in a place where it really matters, is at the project level. So now not only can you determine what's happening from an employee engagement perspective and so much more, but now you can have really good idea of how your projects are going. So at the C-suite, at the table, looking at the chat sessions, the table, the C-suite table, when someone says, okay, how's it going? You have the employee engagement data and you have the project data to say, hey, you know what? Working from home over a period of time, it started out real good. We're starting to lose cohesion. The teams are starting to be less, and our projects are becoming more at risk. So how do we use workplace to alleviate that risk? And I think that's something that's changed the game, right? Let me go into this next slide for a second. Maybe. There we go. So in terms of innovating and what that means for the industry, some of the things that I've seen in the chat, and we'll bring up some more chats in a second, is, hey, having a vendor or a consultant come in that talks to us about IoT solutions and how they integrate, how does that fit in with enterprise? And is that really a problem? Is that going to put people off? And the answer is, I don't think so. I don't think so for a couple of reasons, because I don't think enterprise, your IT group, is focused on this type of technology. Potentially HR is focused on this type of technology, but the platforms that they have deployed, SAP and all the other people analytics stuff, is siloed and doesn't exactly help them understand or fit in some of the workplace data that we have. Right? So there is an absolute opportunity to have a really good conversation around an innovative approach to being able to break these silos down and to be able to put together some customized solutions to be able to move these forward. Right. So, Vic, not to put you on the spot, but in your conversations with the folks that you're having a conversation with in terms of outsourcing facility management and procuring those services and systems, is that a glimpse of what maybe they're thinking about, or is it not quite there yet?
Well, sometimes you have to put some of those thoughts into their head because they're looking at data that they're collecting. A lot of it's just purely on utilization, but I think there's two types of data collection. There's one that's sort of active, and then one that's passive. In a way, and I don't mean passive in the same way it's typically described, but for instance, my movements around the office building, you can collect data on my movements without me physically giving you that data. It's just tracking either my badge or RFID device or Bluetooth, device. There's ways to collect data, and it can be anonymous, but it can be something that gives you an insight as to what facility attributes that I use, conference rooms and other things like that. Then there's the active data where you're going to ask me what my opinion is about productivity, about collaboration, about utilization of space, about the efficacy of the space that I'm trying to use. And you're going to solicit that information from me through some surveys, maybe some immediate feedback as I leave the conference room as to whether that meeting was worthwhile or whether it could have been done over a Zoom call or whether it was productive or not productive. You can get a lot of information if you ask. So I think there's two types of data collection that need to happen. And I think the challenge is that most clients that I work with don't know that there's the ability to collect that type of data in those types of ways to give them more insight as to whether their employees feel a sense of productivity in the office or not. And I think over the last 18 months, as we've been working from home, people have asked informally whether Zoom is working and whether collaboration is working. And maybe there's an intuitive sense that it is, but have they collected that information to sort of prove out, as your video just showed, whether people feel like those meetings have been as productive on day one of the pandemic as they have been, in the 18th month of the pandemic?
That's an interesting segue as well. Let me bring in what Susan's comment was, because I think it fits directly to that. As so many of us are in back-to-back calls, is that engagement in terms of employee engagement? And the data will say that we are in constant meetings. So we have to have a blend of results. It's interesting.
Busy is not productive, right?
That's it, right? That's it. So, the first thought is, are the meetings worthwhile? Are they accomplishing what they need to accomplish? And are you empowered by your managers to say, let's do something with this meeting set? It's not effective. It's not meeting its intended purpose. The other thing that we can do over time is we can measure the engagement of the individuals on those calls, right? So having a meeting for meeting's sake sometimes isn't the best. In fact, it's never the best. But if you have a very clear understanding of why you're in the meeting, this just goes back to sort of fundamental meeting rules, right? Why do you want everyone to say, do, or decide? And what do you want me to say, do, or decide? Then I know why I'm in the meeting, and I can positively contribute to that. If I have an understanding of that, as an example, maybe I'm in agile meetings where those are very prescriptive and they're very formalized, and you have them very, very programmatically. And I know what my role is, but I'm not contributing to that team over time. Maybe I've started out really good, but then I become disengaged over time. Maybe I'm distracted and I'm not able to answer the question or provide input that I normally would provide. That would show up in some of the data sets that we're saying we need to bring visibility to from a team's perspective. From that perspective, we can see employee disengagement very, very early by looking at the meeting and the meeting qualities that we're looking at. Now, it shows up in other areas too, right? And from some Chris, not to put you on the spot, but I'm gonna. So from a analytics perspective, I think there's some great insight there as well that we potentially can look at around some of the metadata from some of the enterprise systems. And I don't want to kind of give up too much, but is that something that people might be asking for or should be asking for?
They should definitely be asking for it. I'm reading through some of these comments, and I'm enthralled by the conversations that the real life experience people are having is that we are in back to back meetings, and 5 minutes to go to the bathroom or 5 minutes to grab food it's often a rarity, and that's unfortunate. It's leading to burnout in the long term, but in the short term, it's seen as productive. We're all keeping our jobs, so I mean it's a good thing. But when you're looking at engagement and how people are interacting with each other doing team dynamics, there's definitely telltale signs on how the different data patterns are showing up. And you can see that when people join a phone call and 5 minutes later they jump off, or they're in 60-minute meetings 4 times or 5 times a day, there's no heads down time. That the science will say, the research says, our own experience says, there's only a matter of time before these people hit a wall and they can't go on vacation. They can't spend free time with their family. They're going to burn out. They're going to take the next offer that comes their way and they're gone. If they aren't already out the door, there's also telltale signs of communication patterns as people start looking to maybe check out. They either mentally or physically, you will see communication patterns change dramatically over the course of the 6 months leading up to somebody's departure, or someone finally speaking up and raising their hand and saying, I can't do this anymore. You'll see from the very beginning, the researcher was showing that there was a good opportunity that our connections to our direct teams were just going to strengthen, but our peripheral connections, they were going to maybe become more distant. And that's exactly what's played out the last 18 months or 16 months. And we've had the opportunity to see this in the data, and we now have enough information that we can predict the future, and we can see the employees that are most likely to burn out or not maybe contribute as much as they were previously.
Yeah, I would also add to that I think we have some fundamentally flawed tool sets that we use, and we have been using this in business for many, many years. I mean, just consider the fact that I'm thinking just earlier today to an email that I received that doesn't really let me know whether I'm being copied on it for informational purposes or whether I have an action to perform or whether it's critical or whether it's urgent. The challenge is that we have a lot of communication, and the tool sets that we use don't allow us to understand, what the priority is of some of this information. And when we get bombarded by it in various ways, and including the Zoom meetings that you're invited to, whether you don't know if you have a specific agenda or really a purpose for being at that meeting, we have to kind of learn through some of those things as we start to go to this type of new environment. But it gives us a starting point. It actually gives us a huge reset button where we can correct some of the flaws that exist in our way of working and have existed in our way of working for so long as we're redesigning the way we work. So I look forward to all of these new technologies kind of coming in, but even some of the existing technologies to be much more appropriate for a remote-enabled workforce.
Viveka, again, I think there's some brilliance in that statement that you just said. I think first and foremost, we have to be able to measure employee engagement, team dynamics over time, so that we can see the state of our employee base and how they're working together. And Chris, I think you said it very, very smartly as well. When forced into a full remote experiment, we coped and we improvised and we overcame, right? Was that effort sustainable? And there's lots of conversations to have that as to why it's not sustainable. But in the end of the day, it's not. That's what the experiment proved. It's not sustainable to be 100% remote. Okay, got it. So now the question is, I need a physical office, a physical workplace to do something. And it's not be productive, because I can be productive at home. So there has to be some level of strategy around why I have a workplace. The notion is I have a workplace because it better empowers me to be able to help my employees communicate, to collaborate, to build a sense of team. But ultimately, when you think about even just fundamentally how we communicate, there's no tone to the email. It's almost impossible to write a tone to an email. And over time, that starts to wear on you, right? As you become more and more disengaged with how someone feels about you, right? And you're just reading email and you're exchanging emails, maybe on a video call. Pretty soon, you're going to start filling in the gaps, and you're going to start reading the tone of an email as being negative. That's just human behavior, because you don't have a validation point to go, no, that's all in my head. It's, we're good. And it starts building. And I think that's where we are right now. Just from a humanistic perspective, everyone is fearful. That fear has turned into anger, or maybe the way around. The anger's turned into fear. But all of that's now in tones of communications that people have. And I think that's part of what's driving this tsunami of employee turnover. It's not necessarily that they're getting asked to come back to the office. There's a lot of people that want to go back to the office. There's a lot of people that will, but maybe it makes, in their mind, makes more sense to be at home without knowing the overarching benefit of coming in and having these full-time meetings. But being able to measure that over time, absolutely critical. The next thing is, does the physical space that I've designed support the notion of what's happening, right, and what we're trying to do? Does that space help me better communicate? Does it help me better achieve a connection between the teams who are both in the office and hybrid? How do I measure that? And then lastly, it's the technology that I have deployed in the space, and the way that I have it deployed is huge. If you think about the way that we used to do AV in conference rooms, it was the room that was connected to the individual respondent, and the respondent was connected to the room. It wasn't individuals connected individually. So we've got to really put a lot of thought into, unfortunately, all this significant amount of money that we put in, the millions of dollars that we put in, if not hundreds of millions, in these very complicated conference rooms that have very integrated systems just to be able to connect a person to a meeting room, when in reality, meeting kind of how we are now could be a better approach. Fundamentally, go ahead.
I was just going to say, James, I mean, flexibility is kind of really what we got to think about here, right? I mean, we're hearing what organizations, from a commercial real estate perspective, as well as corporations, companies, they're all saying, at least 50% of them are saying, look, we're going to let our employees decide whether or not they're going to be in the office or not, at least 2 to 3 times a week, which means that's a huge amount of responsibility from management kind of moving over to their employees. But more importantly, it's great flexibility, because I don't know about you, I could do head down work much better at home than I could do at work, because I get interrupted constantly, right? So I think we got to think about how that work gets done when we want teams to get together and be effective and be productive.
I agree with you, Mike, 100%. You know, and really what it all comes back to is we need to test, we need to experiment. There needs to be an iterative process. For us to test, we have to have the data. And Chris, again, you smartly mentioned it earlier that everyone's on burnout fatigue and survey fatigue. And can we really rely on surveys, these point-in-time surveys, to really get us a sense for whether or not we're being effective in executing these strategies and being able to, many of these HR strategies, of helping people to communicate and re-engage and to feel better from a well-being perspective? And the answer is probably not. There has to be some point data that's fairly consistent over time so that we can start developing trends to know what we're tweaking and what works and what to do less of and things that's not working well. And that's true from a people perspective, it's true from a place perspective, and it's true from a technology perspective. And, you know, if there was one thought that I would want to leave the audience with, it would be, we've had conversations with many of you on the call, but in those who are watching the recording right now. But, you know, what if we just showed up and did an assessment and we just took the risk away and we said, hey, you know, for little lift on your side and a little bit of lift on our side, let's have a conversation to see what your peers or what the industry is doing. Let's have a conversation about maybe what you're doing. And let's look at how to measure some of these things over time to get this trend data and what you're doing and what your systems can do, and to see if there's any gaps. And I think that addresses some of the earlier things as well, mentioned by some of the comments about maybe it'll get sort of stonewalled by IT. It might, but I think there's a conversation to really talk about the value that it could bring. So that being said, let me kind of do a little bit of a round robin. And I apologize. I don't know if you guys are getting feedback. Hopefully there's not too much feedback on the call, on the recording. But let me go a little bit round robin and start with Mike. And Mike, let me ask you, because we're at the time, strangely enough, 45 minutes goes so really fast these days. What's the thought that you'd want to leave this audience with?
I would say that, and I think about this constantly, right, which is change is going to inevitably happen, right? We had a experiment that turned out to be an experiment that pretty much the entire world had together, right? So very, very difficult for us to walk away and say, let's just go back to the way it was, right? I think there's a huge missed opportunity across all employers if that's kind of the mentality. There's still going to be that. I get it, but think about your risk profile relative to the people, the employees, and talent that you need in the future. And if the risk profile is really low, then maybe it's time to reassess that risk profile around what you want to invest in those employees. And I would say that would be a takeaway that I continue to get out of all of the webinars that I watch.
Yeah, let me, Vic, I'm going to save you the last. I'm going to put you on mute, though. A little bit of the feedback, I think, is coming from your mic, and then I'm going to come back to you in just a sec. Chris, if you had that one thing that you wanted to leave this audience with, a request or a question or something, what would that be, sir?
Sure. Your talent already knows the answers. They've been experiencing these challenges since day one. They know how they can help. They know how you can improve the workplace. It ultimately comes down to us doing a better job of listening to these employees, and whether it's focus groups, interviews, surveys, you name it. But knowing what their perspective is and knowing how we can help improve their life, like that's what's going to make the difference in the end. And I had a conversation just a couple of days ago with an executive. He's like, yeah, we're starting to feel some pain points. I'm like, well, what are those? He's like, well, my SVP just left. I'm like, oh, well, why is that? He's like, well, he wanted to work from home all the time, and we just didn't have the capacity. So it's when the executives are experiencing it at the topmost ranks, like we know that it's already on their mind. So it's just a matter of us getting them to that next step and saying, hey, like, let's do something about it now. We know what the issue is. It's just pause for a second and find a way through this. There is plenty of solutions. It's a matter of having that conversation.
Yeah, that's some excellent insights as well. Vic, let me come back to you, sir. Same question. What do you want this audience to really leave with and take home?
Well, thanks, James. Your point about experimentation is well taken. I think I call it successive approximation. You're going to tweak some things here and there, and you're going to ultimately arrive at what's right for you and your organization. But I think what everybody needs to understand is data is your friend. Make sure that you get it from a couple different places, though. Make sure that you get the data that you can collect empirically, but also make sure that you listen to your people, and as well as the data that you're collecting from sensors and other types of technology. But don't ignore the input that your employees will give you personally about what they're experiencing and what they'd like to experience and how they're feeling about whether the workplace is productive or not. That's going to be probably the biggest driver for making your own organization a healthy, happy, productive workplace.
Oh, it's great. Thank you for that, Vic. You're absolutely, man, that's spot on. I'm looking through some of these comments, and they too have some interesting thoughts that I think everyone should sort of consider. Amira, welcome. Hello. Great comment. It's about empowering employees and providing them with choice, considering the why your employees are returning to the office, opportunity to collaborate, co-create, and innovate. Absolutely, 100%. Being able to co-create a definition of a problem and co-create the solution makes change management so much more easier. I do think the industry is in a little bit of a quagmire at the moment, in that it's so nebulous as to why are you demanding that I come back to the office. Some of these CEOs are saying you must come back to the office, and it's an interesting approach. But unless you articulate very clearly why and how you're measuring it and the improvements that you as an individual can get from that, I don't know that it's going to be very successful. If I know that I could improve my dynamics with my teams and help that team bring in more successful projects, or whatever the deliverable is that's causing us to have a meeting, that makes sense to me. And if I believe that coming into the office, because it has the right environment, it's designed for well-being, it has maybe biophilic design notions in it, and has different types of tools, then I will do that. I will go through the pain, so to speak, of going through public transportation and driving all the way into the office to meet with my teams, because I understand the value and the benefit that it brings to me. So I think that's some very excellent insight. Thank you for that. There are many, many, many comments. So thank you, all of you guys, truly, for that. Amir agreed with you, Mike. So there you go in your statement. I think with that, we've gone about 51 minutes or so. I'm going to close the session. I'm going to thank everyone, for you guys especially, participants, those who have provided comments. We will be going through these comments a little later to take a peek. Thank you for your time in participating in this and for watching this. I'm eager to talk to all of you about what's happening in terms of workplace optimization, about what you're doing and how you're doing it, and breaking down those silos between HR and facilities management and IT. Dear to my heart is, what are the insights that you're able to use that help inform the strategic initiatives that you have in place? So we don't, our road forward as an industry isn't easy. We've got a significant change that we have to deal with, and it's no longer about putting it off and it's a problem for future, James. We've got to solve it right now. So, if not now, then when? Is kind of the conversation. Yeah. So with that, thank you, everyone, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, everyone.